Hey pups, RP here. Monsters, mythical creatures out of folklore, campfire creepypasta stories, and basically anything they can be found or told in, are made to be friends with, or to be feared by. Monsters always find a way to be popularized in all forms of media. Same can be said for villains. Stories, movies, whatever. Villains are basically the important part of the story, despite being evil. And video games are no exception to this rule. For today's video, I'll be counting down the top 15 list of video game monsters and villains. But before we begin, let's go over the rules first. Rule number 1. Games from anime franchises will be counted either as an exception or an example like Persona games. Unfortunately, I won't count games such as the Dragon Ball Fighter games or the Pokemon games. Since the monsters and villains for the Dragon Ball series are mainly characters from the anime, and this isn't an anime villain monsters list. And Pokemon is literally called Pocket Monsters, and the organizations like Team Rocket won't be counted for, because I'm listing non-Pokemon games for this list. The same goes for the Five Nights at Freddy's games, mainly because the animatronics aren't really classified as monsters or villains in my opinion. They're just possessed robots trying to find some rest and peace in the afterlife. But if the villain or monster is a boss, then I may make an exception to this rule, and I most likely will. Rule number 2. I'm going to ignore the one per franchise rule here because I want to look at all characters classified as villains and or monsters in video games. There are no games per franchise rules here. Everyone should know that by now. I'm also foregoing the play before entering rule because to heck with it. Again, everyone should know my list rules by now. Rule number 3. I'm counting games we played as children all the way into horror games themselves. That includes games like Team Fortress 2, Smash Bros, and Undertale. No, I'm not counting the monster characters like Toriel, Sans, and Undyne. And I won't be counting any monsters that are classified as godly or godlike in any way, shape, or form. While there may be some exceptions to this rule, such as Flowey, because technically Azrael is Flowey, and only gained godlike powers after his death, and when he was revived as a flower, and I don't really consider him a full-fledged god, but a demigod if you will. And I won't count characters like Lord Beerus from Dragon Ball Super, for example. I know, not really a video game character, but putting him in as a random example. And finally, rule number 4. Whether these characters on the list are actual monsters, solely villains alone, or the villain themselves, they're all accountable for this list regardless if they're a monster, villain, both, or otherwise. I also won't be counting creepypasta themed games or fan-made games, so games like Thunder the 8 Pages, Sonic.exe, and the Loon game are not going to be shown on this list. That being said, let's get this list started! Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. While I didn't get into the Zelda franchise until high school with Majora's Mask, Ganon is an interesting villain overall. In the N64 games and onward, he's like Jafar mixed with Scar in my super weird opinion. He's the very definition of a true princess and knight story villain. The Zelda franchise is basically a princess knight's fairy tale, in video game form. Whenever you battle Ganon in almost any Zelda game in a final boss battle, he goes from regular villain to a boar. Which begs the question, why'd they choose a boar for Ganon instead of a dragon? Oh well, originality I suppose. Aw, cute piggy. Ah! Scary piggy! Ganon, whether it be a pig wizard from the earlier Nintendo games, a human, or boar beast, is what a true fairy tale villain should be it in video games, storybooks, movies, whatever. He's kinda low on this list due to the fact that while he's an excellent villain monster, he doesn't have a true effect on me, nor did I play any of the other Zelda games before Majora's Mask. The doll bear and mob zombies from Conker's Bad Fur Day. Conker's Bad Fur Day was anything but a bad day when you played it, until you get to the sourly, bittersweet ending of the game. While the game is full of British comedy and fun similar to South Park, it's got some rather creepy moments in it as well, including villains and monsters. When you get to the war level of the game, you enter this weird base-looking place surrounded by submarines and missiles firing at you, and you end up seeing this little girl crying and alone. But once you've finished up some of the tasks, you come to find out she is no little girl at all, spinning her head in a 180, quoting The Exorcist no less, to reveal a bare-bought Frankenstein-looking monster with a little girl as a puppet. Honestly, the girl itself was insanely disturbing enough as it is. Having a cute, adorable childlike voice one minute and a demonic exorcist voice the next. I know the creators of the game wanted to make references to pop culture, but that went a little too far for me. But that doesn't end there. When you enter the ironically named Spooky level and meet Conker's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, you turn into a bat and feed him all the angry villagers to him. Until... Yep, that happens. And then the same villagers you fed him to turn into the undead, and you have to go to full-on first-person shooter at these zombies now. There's no music, the noise these things make are unsettling, and it's definitely the highlight scarier parts of the game, next to the bare-bought girl thing. GLaDOS and Wheatley from Portal and Portal 2. I never got the chance to play Portal until I got it on Steam. Still never played it, but I have had the privilege to play Portal 2. Even though the games have funny and quirky moments, they, along with the other entries on this list, have dark moments as well. In Portal, GLaDOS seems like this mean-spirited sadist who wants nothing more to do but run tests on you, and probably put you through a lot of pain and suffering. In the second game, Wheatley is introduced as your partner and helps you along the way. When he and GLaDOS switch bodies, let me play the clip.
Are you just saying that, or is it really gonna hurt? You're just saying that, aren't you? No, you're not. It is gonna hurt, isn't it? Exactly how painful are we
No, stop, no, 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 no!
Yeah, not very pleasant. But the second Wheatley is in control, he goes insane, turns GLaDOS into a potato, and drops you 1,000,000 feet from GLaDOS' base. Yeah, partner to villain in one swift switch. Ridley, Nightmare, and Mother Brain from Metroid. While I'm not the biggest Metroid fangirl, I still think the game is kinda interesting. It's as if Nintendo took some of the inspiration from the Alien movies and made it their own, with that weird crazy sci-fi twist. I did have a GameCube game of Metroid Prime, and always thought Samus was a boy, but later found out that she was actually a girl in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. With that aside, I kinda want to talk about Ridley for starters. Ridley is Samus' mortal enemy. Not only is Ridley out for blood, but he killed Samus' family. I know, cliche backstory for a protagonist in any form of media, but it's kind of dark and sad for Samus. They died when she was a young child, and was taken in to be raised by a space ranger, and trained to be one herself to avenge her parents. Plus, he's a friggin' space pterodactyl, for crying out loud. I mean, he's one of those arch enemies you love, hate, dread, or want to face, or all of the above. While I've only battled him and met a Ridley in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, he's one of those villain monsters that's similar to Ganondorf. Nintendo's company and creators are very creative when it comes to bosses and villains, and monsters. Speaking of which, moving on to Mother Brain. At first in the NES/SNES Metroid games, Mother Brain is just a head with their brain being exposed. Little gruesome and disturbing in my case, but I digress. Later she got an update with being a weird dinosaur boss thing. A baby Metroid heals you and helps you by turning her into stone. She kills the baby Metroid, and it gives its life to you to defeat this crazy exposed Brainosaurus, and the way she's defeated doesn't make things any better. Personally, I find her revised update in Mother M much creepier and more disturbing than the NES/SNES originals. The same goes for the Nightmare, and speak of the devil, he's next in this three-way tie entry. In the original SNES games of Metroid, when you enter one of the levels, you see something in the shadows flying around, and it makes you nervous with a sense of being alone. When you face the Nightmare for the first time, it looks actually not too bad design-wise. But when you battle it, its face oozes green slime, and the masks are removed to reveal said oozy green nastiness. Ugh, jeez, Nintendo, that's disgusting!
And the walls will ooze green slime! Oh, wait, they always do that.
Joking aside, all these three are specialized villains and monsters, and are the perfect definition of a what-if type of scenario that asks, what if Nintendo made games similar to Alien? And no, Alien Isolation is not going to be on this list. I'm terribly sorry for you Alien Xenomorph fans out there watching. The Horseless Headless Horseman from Team Fortress 2. Yes, a TF2 character is on this list. I have no regrets. This guy is... well, I don't know how to describe him. He's a skeleton with a pumpkin head and has a possibly haunted, demon-possessed axe. And even if you try to fight him in one of the TF2 stages, the Mario stage for me when I played TF2 back in the day, you can't fight back or defeat him. This guy is like freaking Slenderman for crying out loud, but he gets a plus for the design. I like it. King Bowser, the piano, and Mimi from Mario. Yes, another three-way tie. You know him, you love him. He's a mascot for one of the biggest gaming companies internationally around the world. Mario is a fun-loving, colorful game that made Nintendo what it is today. Despite that, there are some creepy moments in the Mario games, as well as some pretty good villains and scary monsters too. I ain't talking about the Boos, the Plumber Brothers rivals Wario and Waluigi, or anything else for that matter. I'll start off the entry with Mario's #1 enemy. King Bowser is a dino turtle thing, who attempts to foil Mario's plans to save Princess Peach, or Princess Toadstool depending on what Mario game you play. I like to call her Peach, because classic villain cliche. Despite that, Bowser is a pretty iconic gaming villain, and the most recognizable one next to Wario. Safe to say, without King Bowser, his Koopas and other minions, and his son Bowser Jr., I don't think Mario would be the heroic princess-saving plumber he'd be today. Well, with Donkey Kong's help, of course, because he was originally the one who kidnapped Peach in the arcade versions of the game. The piano, however, is more of a creepier thing, and is kind of unexpected in Mario 64. Once you enter the room with said piano and red coin, if you remotely get near it, it lives and attacks! The handbook said you can defeat it, but either that was a typo or some false tip. There's unfortunately no way you can defeat it. The piano, while creepy, was more like an unexpected jump scare. Mimi was the closest thing to a creepy villain monster hybrid you'd see in a Stephen King novel, or movie adaptation of said Stephen King novel. At first, Paper Mario seemed lighthearted and friendly, but when Mimi comes into play, something seems off about her from the very beginning. While her various outfits for different levels and stages of the game, along with her first appearance, were equally adorable, looks can be deceiving. That is until she shows her true form. Yuck is right. I mean, the very cracking and snapping of her neck, her being a spider of all things, and just the very Exorcist-style head spinning is enough to creep anyone out. I swear, I feel as if all Nintendo game creators get inspiration from The Exorcist. Psychomantis from Metal Gear Solid. I only know Solid Snake games thanks to Smash Bros. Brawl, but up until then, Metal Gear Solid and its bosses were completely unknown to me. And I have heard of Metal Gear Solid, but never got full interest in it until I looked up different top 5, 10, and 15 lists of video game bosses. Psychomantis is an interesting villain monster to me. While some people like to choose Asara because of the creepy ghost factor, I chose Mantis for this reason as follows. 1. He looks like one of those psychotic horror movie villains, and the pyro mask he wears reminds me of the character Pyro from TF2. Yes, the Pyro is my favorite character. 2. He's pure insanity in the game, making your controller vibrate uncontrollably, no pun intended, insults your manhood, and is just crazy. 3. He looks like a total badass. Yes, those were the only 3 reasons as to why I put Psychomantis on this list. Again, while Sorrow gave off the spectral horror game feeling to Metal Gear Solid, Psychomantis gave off the Hannibal Lecter feel of the game, if you will. And I kinda like it.
What do you think now? Can you feel my power? The demonstration is over.
Gigas from Earthbound. Okay, I get it. You guys are sick of me talking about Gigas at this point. He was a cute-looking Mewtwo creature from the first game released in Japan, but in the second game, it's a symbolism that gives off a creepy, monstrous factor. The theory that he's a fetus from hell, and the fact the creator based it on a childhood trauma, where he thought he witnessed a sexual assault scene after walking into a wrong movie theater, the disturbing macabre music played in the background, the way he talks something like a mental hospital patient or domestic abuse victim, and just his whole entire presence and demeanor throughout the game, is the reason I couldn't not put him on this list. He isn't number 1, but it's the fact that this very symbolism is something you can't shake off or forget very easily. And I know I'm cheating on this one because he's technically a god, but dang it, his symbolism and origins are the reason why he's even on this list in the first place. Coincidence? I think not! Zant from Twilight Princess. I've just started playing Twilight Princess, but thanks to my friend Cole, I've done some full research on Zant. Sure, he's no Ganondorf or Majora, but he's like one of those villains you couldn't just brush off or remotely forget when it comes to Zelda boss battles and enemies. I have so much I could and can say about Zant and what makes him a great villain monster, but since this video is probably already long enough as it is, I'm just gonna do the short version of it all. He's kind of like the priest of Ganondorf's church, if Ganon was a god. He's kind of like an illusionist when you fight him, kind of similar to Zorak in Pokemon. And he's one of those crazy people who are so obsessed with religion and power that it overpowers their mental and emotional health. I understand that there are plenty of Christians out there who believe in self-care because they believe God wants their mental and emotional stability to be just as healthy as their physical health. But there are some Christians, such as Jehovah's Witnesses, who believe self-care is equal to selfishness, and spend their whole time praising their version of God and Jesus all day, every day, and even force this type of practice, religion, and unhealthy lifestyle upon their own family members, even freaking children. Zant just feels like one of those people who are so obsessed with power over the Shadow Realm that he forces the other residents of the realm to praise him as a future ruler and slowly slips into insanity. Speaking of which... Majora from Majora's Mask. I've said this a million times over. Majora's Mask is one of my favorite Zelda games of all time. But what makes it so interesting and unique, other than the game being closer to the original creator's vision of the Legend of Zelda franchise, is a strange yet interesting battle between you and Majora itself. Majora is 3 forms of what the F Nintendo in my opinion, with its first form being a floating mask head with tentacles growing on its back, and evolving into its second stage evolution, which is a Cyclops creature that just randomly dances and clucks for no reason other than random silliness, I guess. But its second stage is just the calm before the storm. Its final form is nothing on Frieza's final form, or even his golden Frieza form nonetheless. It bulks itself up, grows a pissed off head with a Cyclops eyeball on top of it, and its arms transform into whips. Majora's Mask and other Zelda games, mainly Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, are one of those dark Nintendo games where it has its what the F moments, and the battle with Majora is no exception to this rule. Eggman / Dr. Robotnik from Sonic the Hedgehog. Eggman, Robotnik, whatever you call him, and whatever Sonic generation you play, Eggman and Robotnik are one of those mad scientist characters that are more like an evilish comedic relief in the cartoons, but in the games, they're the mortal enemy to Sonic and his friends. I've only watched the Sonic X anime and the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog to know about these two, so I can't really say much about either of them, other than they're scientists out for the Chaos Emerald and the Master Emerald, along with defeating everyone's favorite blue hedgehog. But to quote said blue hedgehog, they're too slow! Sonic is just way too fast for them in form of wits, speed, skill, and everything else when compared to the bumbling mad scientists.
You! I don't have time for this.
Starwolf from Star Fox. Originally I was going to put Andross on this list as a number 4 entry, but I figured Andross would kind of count as a god, seeing as he's a robot who eventually shows his true disgusting form as a floating brain with eyeballs, so Starwolf was the second best option for this entry. While Fox and his team travel throughout space to stop evil and tyranny throughout the galaxy, Wolf and his team are the polar opposite. I don't know too much about the Star Fox games and the characters to say much, but I think the only reason why I chose Starwolf is because I have an undying love for wolves. Yeah, that's about it. Next! Lost Spirits from Undertale. I was going to pick Flowey for this entry, but like with Andross, I decided against it, and chose the Lost Souls and Alphys' real lab from Undertale. While Undertale isn't considered a horror game, these things give off that vibe. They're considered Alphys' failed experiments, which caused her to become more and more depressed and feeling guilty, and slowly turned her into an introvert, once the reincarnated souls became more and more deformed. When you encounter them and battle them, they're very unsettling, and they look like something out of a horror movie. But once spared, they're only innocent lost souls looking for some form of peace and wondering where their families are. It's actually kind of sad once you think deeply into it. The Spider Queen from Okame. Okame is a beautiful game with the traditional style of Japanese painting mixed with 3D models. Regardless, their villains, monsters, and bosses are kinda weird, and the Spider Queen is a big member of the weird monsters and villains in video games. I have a major phobia of spiders, and the Spider Queen is one of those creatures I do not want to see IRL. It has zombie-like hands for feet, has a rotten flower on its back with eyes growing out of it, and it's called the prostitute spider in Japan. Aw, cute prostitute spider. Ah! Scary prostitute spider! And that doesn't help that our spirit appears on the wrecked ship level of the game. And that stage is already horrific enough as it is. But the number one spot can even top the Spider Queen herself. Maybe to the point where it can even scare her. I wouldn't count on that. Louise Legend from Lollipop Chainsaw. After looking at so many kid-friendly games, and more than just a handful of Nintendo games, I figured a villain monster from a zombie game would be an appropriate fitting for the number one entry. Lollipop Chainsaw is one of my favorite zombie games of all time. You get to play as a zombie hunting cheerleader, for crying out loud. That's the best kind of cheerleader there is. And to say that I have an unhealthy obsession with zombies would be a bit of an understatement. I was going to add Killabilly for this list, but again, like with Andros and Flowey, Killabilly is considered a god, so I went with one of my favorite zombie bosses, Louise Legend. Aside from Josie, mainly because of his auto-tuned voice is why I like him so much, Louis is one of my favorite zombies to fight in the game. Not only does he have an electric guitar machine gun thing, I'm not sure what that is, all I know about it is that it's a guitar gun. It's awesome. I like it. Has an elephant motorcycle robot. He's also a rock zombie. I get that Zed kind of has that look, but Louis is more of my speed when it comes to rock. Sorry, Zed. You're just way too much of a bad My Chemical Romance wannabe. And this is coming from a huge My Chemical Romance fangirl. Louis won more so for the looks, the super fun boss fight, and for how much of a good job the voice actor did for him. Louis, my boy, rock and roll is here to stay, and so are you.
Woo! Whole lot of shaking going on.
May us meet there again from the fire.
I hope you pups enjoyed this video, and if you don't agree with these choices on this list, be sure to leave a comment on what your top video game villains and bosses are. And that being said, cue the outro, because I'm gonna go enjoy a nice cup of hot chocolate and play some Lollipop Chainsaw.